toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, right? But until we see that we're all one and we're literally connected, we're going to continue this war. But I do feel like that narrative is changing though.
The economy being a certain way is not an excuse for me to not find success in my life. That's not accountability.
Do we have to go through pain and suffering?
I believe that mothers and teachers are really doing the best that they can.
That she is a reflection of you. That's not any pressure at all.
Right. Anytime anything a man does that someone doesn't like, it is very easy to just, oh, it's toxic masculine. And then it reaches a breaking point. But then I was empowered to start making different choices and creating something differently.
You're a piece of my life, but you are not my entire life.
So it's easier just to not say anything at all.
Spirituality and capitalism belong together. Those thoughts, those feelings, that comes from something bigger than I am. And together I believe we can all grow. That's how we're going to change the world. That's how we're going to change the planet. Joe Speredon, welcome to The Spiritual Capitalist. I am so excited to get into this today. I remember the first time that I met you was at an event that Burnell was holding here in Salt Lake City called, I believe it was like the Vision Quest or
Quantum Vision.
Quantum Vision, that's
Yeah.
what it was. And I remember you walk into a room and I was like, man, that guy right there, there is something about him, the way he holds himself, the way he walks, like he has been doing some deep work. And when I listened to you speak in front of this group, as I told you today, just to give some context to the audience, is where we were at this event that was more of a conscious community event of all different kinds of concepts and ideas that were going on. And you got up there and you talked about masculinity, and you talked about, basically that boys don't cry, and this narrative that we hear quite often. And I told you today, I was like, listen, man, I love who you are, but that message was so watered down. And I really want you to come on, and I want to really get deep and talk about what's going on in the world when it comes to the masculine, because it's a really important subject to me. And it's even a more important subject to me because most of the people I talk to personally that do business, that are running businesses, for the most part, not all, but for the most part, are men. And these men are suffering alone, and they're suffering in pain. And so today I really want to dive into really what it means in the masculine wound and what that is, what that means to you. But before we jump into that, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Tell people what you're up to so they can get to know a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited to be here and just to be able to have this conversation. Any place in time where we can talk about masculinity and what's really happening in that space is so valuable and so important. For myself, I was born and raised here in Utah and grew up in a very traditional family, traditional Utah culture, married, father of 4. And I found myself a number of years ago reaching kind of that cliche midlife crisis point, existential crisis, faith crisis, just all wrapped up into one.
What's going on at this point? Because that's so easy to say, hey, listen, I was going through this crisis. There was some emotions going on through me. But I think for people to really relate to you, can you give us just a little bit more of that story, what's going on internally, what, like some of the external and the internal?
Yeah. So for myself, what it was, there wasn't a big catalyst. There wasn't some, father dying or losing a job or something like that. From the outside perspective, my life was going pretty well. I was doing, really well in business. I was doing well with my family and my community, personal health, all of those things. But all of the emotion that over the course of the previous 30 years I had learned to repress and I had learned to ignore. And I was telling myself that same story, men don't cry, I don't feel these things, the lone wolf narrative, a lot of different things I was telling myself weren't sticking anymore. And as I was trying to push that emotion down, it started to come out sideways. And it came out in, an inclination towards addiction. And that was something as simple as sugar. But I was feeling a lot of panic. I was having anxiety attacks, which I'd never had before. My ability to function at work was severely compromised. I was exhausted all the time. I wasn't able to focus. And it was becoming debilitating in my life. And I didn't know how to handle it. Up to that point, anytime I'd ever felt stress or overwhelm, I was able to just kind of push it a little further down, find some new way to numb myself or distract myself to that and move forward. And that wasn't working anymore for me. And so that is where I landed. And it started to come to this point of like, I can't function as a human being. Now, having people that I was responsible for, I kept telling myself, well, I would never take my own life. I have these people that I care about that I'm, taking care of.
But that moment in time, you're starting to feel a little bit like this.
That's the desire. I wish that I could. And then one day I came home and I thought to myself, I should do that for these people.
So you thought at that moment in time, I should take my own life, because it sounds like you had started like be kind of somewhat obsessive about like this thought is going on and it's not leaving.
Yeah.
And you recognize at this point in time, you should actually kill yourself for these people, not for you, but justification that you should do it for these people. Why?
Well, up to that point, it was, I can't do that because they need me for the finances that I provide, for the stability that I provide, or whatever else it was. But as my life continued to devolve and become less manageable, I was no longer feeling like I had the capacity to do those things. But I did have a stellar life insurance policy. And so it was this idea of, this is the only way that I can provide still for these people. And that scared me, because that was the first time I'd ever had that thought and had relief associated with it. Up to that point, it had always been fear and hesitation and reluctance. And I knew that I was going down that path, and I started to even plan that out and what that could look like and where that could happen and all that type of stuff. And in a last-ditch effort, I started looking, and I was introduced to Sacred Sons, which is an organization that does beautiful work. They do retreats, and they do retreats for men to come together and do a lot of different things. From an external viewpoint, it's, we're going to go sing in the woods and play drums and howl at the moon and, this type of stuff. And it didn't feel like it fit my personality.
Right.
But I'd seen some of the feedback on what men were experiencing there, and hey, I'll give it a try.
Because you're at the end of your rope.
Exactly.
Right? You're like, I'm either going to take my own life or I'm going to play and I'm going to go all in.
Yeah.
Which you're still here, so
right.
We can see you played all in.
And thank God for that organization. Thank God for the opportunity to have been there and to have met other men that I found something out during my time there. And that was, I'm not the only one going through this. In all of my intelligence and all of my years of life and all of my experience, it had never really occurred to me that other men might be feeling these same things.
Because nobody acts like it.
Because we don't talk about it.
No, not at all. You can't talk about that.
Right.
You can talk about everything else. You just cannot talk about the way you feel, your emotions, your feelings, and you just have to hold that internally.
Yep.
Like all on your own. I think that narrative is changing because of the work you're doing. I know that's still there. I know it still exists, but I do feel like that narrative is changing, though. I don't think it's this constant thing, but I would say a lot of men, that I bring into my own space, I'm like, hey, man, I see your suffering. Like, I see what you're actually going through. Why? Because I've been there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel that. So you go through Sacred Sons. All of a sudden, it sounds like there's some things that happen inside of you that give you a new outlook, a new view on life to now start to do things differently?
Absolutely. So I could speak about my experience there for a day and everything that I was able to see inside of myself, to see in other men. But I started to connect back to my own heart. And in the awareness of my feelings, in the awareness of other masculine experience, I started to realize that I did have choices, that there were things that I could do in my life to start to address the feelings that I had. The most difficult thing was realizing that the life that I had created. And accountability for what I was experiencing was my own. At that point in time, I wanted to be a victim. I wanted to say, this was everybody else. This is what everybody else is doing to me. And it just wasn't true. I didn't control other people's experiences, but everything that I had done up to that point in my life had created my circumstance. And I was introduced to a mentor there that helped me see this. It was so difficult to admit that. But when I started to own my choices up to that point, it started to feel like I had choices beyond that point again. And that was an empowering place to be.
That is one of the most empowering places to be. It's something I look at constantly. Like right now, I was telling you earlier, I was like, listen, I right now am looking at this concept is pain and suffering. Do we have to go through pain and suffering? And I have a lot of thoughts on this, but the one thing is for sure is that once we are accountable and recognize that we create everything, and that up until that point in time, like the circumstances, they're mine. Like people get to view them however they want to, but I'm still creating those things. But the acknowledgement of that, because it's really easy to be a victim. It's really easy to like blame other people. It's really easy to be an abuser. But by God, it's hard to be a creator. Like to recognize like I am the creator in these things and I am empowering these things. That's a tough, that can be a challenging place to be when that moment clicks in. But once it really kicks in, tell me if you agree or disagree with this, that it becomes extremely empowering.
Absolutely. Extremely empowering, extremely liberating. Once I started to recognize that I was that creator, it was uncomfortable, as I say, because I was in such a situation. But then I was empowered to start making different choices and creating something differently. My life, the way that I had been raised, the conditioning that I think a lot of men experience was this idea of accountability means that I am managing everybody else's emotions about my choices. So I wake up in the morning and think, dear God, what is the world going to do to me today? And I hope that my partner is nice, and I hope that the weather is nice, and I hope my boss is nice, and I hope the government is good, and I hope the economy is good. And if everything outside of myself is happy and good, well, then I have a shot in hell at happiness. And so we spend the majority of our life managing everything externally. That's not accountability. Accountability was, what do I want to create? And what am I creating? Everybody else's thoughts or feelings about it be damned. Not that we don't have a responsibility to those, but that can't be the primary place that we're coming from in creation. And that's what I've been doing for years. So I started to shift that narrative that I'm not responsible for somebody else's feelings about my choices, that I'm not responsible for how my boss might be behaving or acting or whatever that might be, that the economy being a certain way is not an excuse for me to not find success in my life because I'm a creator. And if I really truly believe that, then that doesn't matter what the economy might or might not be doing. So absolutely, incredibly empowering place to be. And that was what I got to consider driving home from this event.
Like you just dropped so much knowledge right there. Like you dropped so much wisdom and knowledge through your own experiences that there is nothing outside of the self that you're able to be victim to when you create that type of internal, I would call it knowing, like that center of the knowing in the heart. When that connection happens, it's like, wait a minute. There is something much greater to this than what I can actually see. And did the world change? Because I'm guessing at this point in time, your world changes based upon what I know about you. But did the world change or did I change?
Right.
And if I'm creating my reality, then actually the world did change. But it's only because of my perspective of what the quote unquote illusion of the world is of either everything works for me or everything is like basically chaos, right? And I'm responsible for the way that everybody in the world reacts to my choices. Now, I can be conscious about my choices and decisions. At the same time, I don't have to have ownership because when I have ownership, tell me if you agree with this or not, but I want to fix things, right? Like when I have ownership of people's feelings and emotions, I'm like, oh, hell, great. I just want peace. I just want freedom. I just want everybody to be okay. I want people to be empowered. And that's an easy place to sit into. And I would love to dive deeper in that because I know that most men, we feel that way, right? Like when I was a kid, my grandfather said, listen, your job is to make sure that if you ever you're married, that you take care of your woman. She's happy because if mom's happy, everybody's happy. Right. Also, you make sure she looks good, dresses good, takes care of things good. Make sure she drives a nice car. Make sure that all of her needs are basically met. And because if not, then she won't be happy and you won't be happy. And also that she is a reflection of you. That's not any pressure at all.
Right.
That sounds like
Zero.
something I want to sign up for. Like, hold on, I get to be responsible for somebody or everything about them. And if not, it's a reflection on myself because my partner's not happy or my wife's not happy. That's an interesting place to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of codependency, right?
Right.
Is where my value, how people perceive me, my worth is determined on how you're showing up and what you're doing and what you're not doing and how you feel about life. And it's an impossible task. Because you look at that relationship or any kind of relationship, and you and I are having a discussion, and you say to me, "You're making me angry." Well, now, if I'm willing to say, "You're right, I'm making you angry," one, I'm disempowering you because you don't own your emotions now, they're mine.
Yep.
And two, it is now my responsibility to take care of those. And so I'm going to say, "I'm sorry." I'm going to say, "I recognize how I did that." I'm going to say, "I won't make you angry anymore." But how you show up day to day is going to be different. So what makes you angry day to day might be different. So me managing your emotions day to day might be different. And it's impossible. It's not sustainable.
I would like, let's dive into this. Like, I want the audience to know, because there's some things I really want to get into. We could talk about your story all day long, and it's a beautiful story. And right now, after you going through all of this awakening, you now empower men. You have an incredible program that you teach. You make it extremely accessible for anybody. Like, and I love that about you, that you give so much for so little. Because your goal, from what I can tell since the beginning I met you, is to empower men, give them a place where that they can be vulnerable and they can be who they are, which are these true warriors, but not from a place of hurt and pain and those things, but just really like the empowerment of what a warrior means and the peacefulness, or I'd call even a peaceful warrior, especially meeting you. Like, you're the most gentle giant ever. And standing next to you, I'm like, man, like, we're the same height, but this man, I mean, you can see on camera here, this man's shoulders is like the size of a semi, but he's the most gentle man when I'm walking with him, I can tell. So, but to see what you've done to empower men, I think is really important, which we'll get into a little bit at the end. But I do want to dive into a little bit of really what it means to be not just a man, but like, so that people at home that are men or women that are there, like, let's talk about this divine area in masculine, but let's really dive in before we go into there. Let's just talk about like what is happening from the wounding of the masculine and where it starts from and where, and so that people can understand a little bit more, because you've got a lot of study in this.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, because that is a really important place for us to address. What men are experiencing right now, aside from the fact that we are absolutely isolated from each other. There have been recent studies, and I can't reference any specific one at the moment, but if you go and just do a quick Google search and say, how many friends do men have? It's on average like less than one.
It's not many.
And it's because we've created a culture where there's so much competition between you and I. And if I admit that I want connection, or I admit that I want help or anything like that, or support, that somehow indicates a level of weakness in myself. And men don't trust men. Now, we could go back again 100 years and start talking about the Industrial Revolution and how men started going to work. And they weren't going out with their fathers. Sons weren't going with their fathers anymore. They weren't going with their uncles or their grandfathers and spending time together. We weren't hunting and, going out and doing these things, building together. And so men started to go to jobs. And then going into the 20th century, they started going off to war. And so what happened is you had boys that were left with their mothers. And if fathers weren't physically absent, they were often mentally and emotionally absent. And so as I'm sitting there with my mother, and my mother's raising me, she's going to teach me how to be a good boy. And because I'm a child, and my survival is literally dependent on what this person provides for me, I learned that my behavior creates connection. And if this woman is telling me to do certain things and I do those things, then I'm a good boy, that I'm deserving of love, and that I will be taken care of. And then we reach 5 or 6 years old and we go into the school system, especially here in the United States.
Right.
Where 85% of teachers are women.
They're all women, yeah.
And this is reinforced to get good grades, to be successful in the world, to be doing all of these things, do what this person says, learn to regurgitate that back in a really good way, and that means that you have value. That means that you have worth. So much of the masculine wound is from the absence of the masculine in their life, especially in those formative years. And as we were talking about earlier, the idea of having elders or tribal leaders or some of these things, it's just not the way that it used to be. And so where are we going to get wisdom? Where are we going to get a lot of this information? And it doesn't mean that these women are showing up in any kind of like manipulative way necessarily. I believe that mothers and teachers are really doing the best that they can.
I do too.
But you take the idea of like men teaching girls how to be women, that seems absurd. But the idea of having women teach boys how to be men, somehow that seems a little more logical, and it's because it's what we're experiencing. So that's brought us to this point where we have men that have learned that it doesn't really matter what I want. It doesn't really matter what I feel. I need to show up and do what this woman, whether that's my mother or my partner or my friend or my boss, if she tells me to be a certain way or act a certain way, I'm going to do that. And that will get my needs met. And so we've created the nice guy. And if you're familiar with the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover, he addresses this in really beautiful ways. But essentially, people think, oh, it's great to be nice. That's actually a really good thing. But the nice guy, as defined here, doesn't do things just out of the kindness of his heart. There's an ulterior motive to it. There's always a hidden agenda behind the thing that he's doing. If I do this, then I'm going to get this in return. And then when that's not met, it creates resentment. It creates punishment and abuse and a lot of anger that comes from these men. On top of that, men are terrified of conflict because, again, growing up, if I had conflict with my mother, well, that meant I was going to be disconnected. That meant I wasn't going to be cared for, and I was going to be punished. So I have needs, I have wants, I have desires, and I'm just going to learn to do those in a really hidden way to avoid any kind of conflict. And we're creating this as a society for men.
Mm. Yeah, and that's something that I see actually not getting better. I see getting worse. Now, I would say in certain communities it's getting better. Like from the man side of things, I think it's getting a little bit better because there's more awareness there. But we are standing in this place right now. It's us against them or them against us. I'm not putting myself in any one of these camps, right? Mm-hmm. And I know you're not either, because I do believe that we're all things. I believe that we're also masculine, we're also feminine, like we're all things. But primarily in this body, for me personally, I relate more to the masculine side of things, right? Mm-hmm. Not to saying my feelings aren't emotional, not to saying that when I don't dive into, I would say, the metaphysical side of things, that I'm not entering into the emotional or into the feminine, right? Because there's both sides of this. But right now, it's like we have this war, and it's a war between these two camps, which makes no sense. It's like either we call it this word is used a lot, and that is the toxic masculinity, but we don't talk about the toxic femininity. Mm-hmm. We only talk about the divine feminine. Where the hell did this happen? Like, both camps also have divine masculinity over here and divine femininity, and toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, right? But until we see that we're all one and we're literally connected, we're going to continue this war. So what is it you're seeing in the groups that you're with? What is it you're seeing between these men that are suffering silently that finally come to you? What are they talking about with their views of the feminine? Because there's both sides of this.
Certainly there is. And what I believe men are mostly experiencing, and what I've witnessed, is that term toxic masculinity, and the other really popular buzzword is patriarchy, is anytime anything a man does that someone doesn't like, it is very easy to just, oh, it's toxic masculinity. Or if a man does something, experiences something, oh, it's the patriarchy. If I don't like it, if I'm uncomfortable with it, rather than seek to understand, rather than seek to unite and find compassion and empathy for each other, we can just throw these buzzwords at it. And it doesn't require any explanation. It doesn't require any awareness of what that word might actually mean. I just get to say it, and now you are condemned. End of story. And so a lot of men are getting to this place where they're saying, I've been in this codependent relationship and I'm starting to break, and I want to leave the relationship, and I don't ever want to be in a relationship with anybody. And I want to be independent, and I want to go live in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and I don't want to talk to anybody anymore because I'm sick of being blamed for everything that's wrong in the world. And if anything goes wrong ever, it's my fault. And again, it's going back to this idea of accountability that, hey, I'll own my choices. And if I'm doing things that are wrong, yeah, I want to make better choices. I want to make more aligned choices, but I'm responsible for everybody's feeling about it too. And it's exhausting. And so men are entering into this toxic independence where it's like, I need to be independent, but that requires me to vilify the feminine.
Right.
And
which is dangerous.
Absolutely. And I recognize this in the feminine often as well, which is men are toxic, it's the patriarchy, men are evil, and I'm independent. But again, it requires the vilification of the other side. And you're right, it is division, and it's us against them, you against me, and it's not serving us at all.
Where's this coming from, though? Because we haven't, like, from your perspective, right? Because you're dealing with men all the time, right? You're talking to them constantly because you're coaching them and you're walking them through their shadow work. You're walking them through these places that they're not able to speak about or to get out about, or revealing their biggest secrets. And a lot of people are like, oh, their biggest secrets. It's like, do you know the freedom of that? Like, you're sitting men down and having them talk about their secrets to each other to realize they're not alone. Another subject, but where do you think this is coming from the feminine side? Do you think this is something that's being perpetuated through media? Do you think it's something that is there to really truly divide and conquer, or like, because it seems like it's getting a lot of noise, and I say noise for a reason, because that noise makes it really hard to listen to our heart sometimes.
Yeah. In all of society, as you study history, we tend to see a pendulum, and this pendulum swings one way, and then it reaches a breaking point. And if we want to continue to evolve as society, that pendulum needs to start swinging back the other direction. What I feel like has happened is, in many ways, the pendulum has swung the other direction. And it's very difficult. If I have $200 and you have $100, and that we're trying to find equality, once I get to a point where I'm saying, okay, I'm going to give you some of mine, and I give you $10, and then I give you 10 more, and you say, hey, it's still not equal, and I give you 10 more, and the momentum is going towards me giving to you.
Right.
At what point in my time am I going to say, hey, we've actually both got 150 now, things are good?
Yeah, let's just even this out. Yeah.
So who is the person that's going to say, I think we've actually accomplished some equality. I think we've actually found some middle ground here, rather than continuing in a victim mindset to say, I want more, give me more. And it comes to this idea of like compensation of, well, yeah, you didn't do this, but men for generations have been really awful. And that's somehow a justification for men now needing to suffer and be accountable for not only my own actions and not only your feelings about it, but my father's actions and his father's actions. So when can we look at this objectively? When can we look at this from a place of compassion and empathy and start seeing each other and hearing each other in that space? I love you. You love me. Where do we actually have middle ground here? What do we actually want to experience, rather than you're the bad guy or I'm the bad guy? And that is so much of our culture right now, is this idea of whoever it is, Democrat, Republican, white, black, all the different things.
There's a lot of stuff separating us out there. Not a lot saying how connected we are, but there's definitely a lot saying we are very separate.
Yeah.
And I agree with what you're saying. So we know that there's a problem, right? I like to look at solutions, because it's so easy for people to bring their problems to the table. I know I have lots of like problems, AKA learnings to be had. But when you're looking at men out there, right, and they're listening to this podcast, or they're watching this on YouTube and they're seeing, they're connecting with you, what's some of the advice that you give them? I know advice is cheap, but like, what are some of the things that they can do that will help them? I mean, besides joining your program, but like, what is the things that they can do at home to start to get more in alignment with themselves and start to realize, like, to empower them?
Right.
Because it's easy to disempower somebody, but it's a hell of a lot harder to empower somebody.
Absolutely. this idea of a nice guy, and people say, well, I'm not going to be a nice guy anymore. Oftentimes the assumption means, well, that means I have to go be an asshole.
Right. Means I got to be the abuser.
I have to go be an abuser. I have to go be a jerk. I have to go take my power back.
Which you see a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'm had it. I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. So therefore, I'm going to be the asshole.
For these men that are in really miserable spots, how have I created this life? And saying, like, I've made choices that are misaligned, that haven't been serving me, without having to self-deprecate, without having to tie shame and guilt and blame around it, because that is what most men do, is when we start owning our choices, we also have to start owning some sort of punishment, even self-punishment for those things that we've done. And that ultimately doesn't really serve anyone. So letting go of this idea of accountability means I have to suffer. Accountability means that I have to be in pain. I can simply say, I'm making a choice. I don't want to make that choice anymore. I'm going to realign myself and make a new choice. Instead of, I made this choice. I made that choice for 10 years. What is wrong with me? And blah, 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 blah. And spend another 2 years judging yourself, getting down on yourself for the previous 10. Well, now you're 12 years in and you still haven't made any changes. So why do we feel this commitment, this need to stay in the suffering longer? So that's one of the things that I do. 2 is letting go of this idea of the lone wolf. I need to do this by myself. Nobody cares. Nobody gets it. Nobody wants to talk to me about it. It's bullshit. It's not accurate. It has been, but it's not accurate. There are people that care. There are people that want to hear you. There are people that are experiencing similar things. And just knowing that is incredibly cathartic and incredibly healing. So when I can let go of the shame around my choices, when I can let go of the idea that I'm alone in this, and when I can start giving myself permission to have desires, to have feelings, to have ambitions, and speak to them, you start to see a whole slew of choices in your life. And that's for men or for women.
I love that. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. Like, those things are vital, really. Like, vital in the progression of the self and in progression of society as a whole, right? And if we're teaching these things to the young men growing up, which you've got obviously a handful of them, and teaching those messages, right? Versus pain, suffering, lone wolf, us against them. We have to break people down before we can build them up. And I know I've fallen into that, right? Like, I have, because I have actually done that. And so one of the things that occurred to me as we were talking, I was thinking about the feminine from the perspective of, there's a lot of incredibly loving women out there that see what the men are going through, right? They see what they're going through. I don't think they know what to do, though. Like, they're like, how can I love? How can I support? How can I support my partner? How can I support maybe it's my father, my uncle, like, who's ever listening, that they're like, listen, I see the problem as well. I see that men are committing suicide at record rates right now. I see that men are suffering alone. I see that men, and obviously women too, but that they've got these big time addictions in life that they're avoiding, that they're numbing out, that these men are sitting around playing video games and, like, avoiding life. What do I do to help lift up the masculine and support them in a way that's going to empower them, in a way that's going to let them know, like, hey, listen, you're not alone. And also in a relationship standpoint of what I can do to make sure that I'm also honoring that man.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful, and so important. I meet with, obviously, just dozens of men every week, new men that I'm introduced to. Most of those introductions come by way of a woman.
That's what I would think.
And it's a woman that says, I see you suffering. I see you in this place. You need to go find brotherhood. You need to go find connection. Or I'll have women reach out directly to me that says, please, can you talk to my father? Please, can you talk to my son? Please, can you talk to my friend? And he needs this support. He needs this connection. When I speak to women, the things that I encourage, first is curiosity. Is if a man is in a space, what are you feeling? And it's kind of like a teenager. Most of the time you're going to get this very numb, vague, oh, I'm fine. I'm okay. but opening that up to further curiosity. It's, well, what does that mean? What are you actually going through? And why men don't want to respond to that is because they don't want this woman to feel accountable for their emotions because that's been their experience. Also, we've learned as men that conflict is dangerous.
Because it can be used against you.
Yeah, because it can be used against you. Conflict we avoid because we associate it with contention. If there is disagreement, that means there's also going to be fighting. That means there's also going to be punishment. That means there's also going to be consequences. And so being able to have a discussion about what I'm feeling, about what's going on in life, about how I perceive you, about how I perceive myself, and even not agreeing on those things, without that meaning that the relationship has to end, or without meaning that I'm now going to see you as an awful human being, women can create a feeling of safety for men to start talking with them. Now, I don't believe personally that it's a woman's role to really hold space for a man in that. And that is where I do encourage them to, send their men to other men. And men can hold that for each other in really important ways. Then they can come home and have more of an expression of, hey, I've been feeling this way and I'm going through this and this is how I'd really love your support, rather than just leave it all on you.
Yeah.
Because the number one thing as women come to me and talk to me is, I'm tired. I'm tired of holding all of this. I'm tired of him coming home from work and complaining to me for 3 or 4 hours. I'm tired of him just coming home and playing video games for the rest of the night. I'm tired. He needs other men. He needs that support. He needs that connection. And they intuitively see it and feel it.
That's the word I was going to say. They intuitively know. And I think men, we know too. Like I can see it in men as well. Like it's very apparent to me. And I think those conversations are worth being had. But let's go back a little bit into the relationship side. Let's say that we're gonna do some role playing here, right? And you're going to, because you know this language, you're going to be in this standpoint, you're going to be the feminine, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to stand over here and like, so I've had a hard day and I want or need a conversation of support, but I also don't want and like we have something going on between the two of us. So let's say, I don't know, maybe a common thing is like maybe that you don't feel loved or you don't feel seen or not enough time or whatever the thing is going on, right? But a lot of times that comes into a place in my experience in relationships where it's like there's the blame side. Mm-hmm. You don't give me enough time. You don't do this. You don't do it that way. Why don't you make me feel this way? You used to make me feel happy. Now you don't. You know, it's like all these things. You're like, whoa, hold on a second. I'm just trying to like fight dragons all day long. And there's so much going on. And yes, you're important to me. And you're not the only thing. Like there's so many other things. You're a piece of my life, but you are not my entire life.
Right.
How do we have this conversation?
Man, that is a great question. I can speak from my personal experience and the men that I've met with. If you compare a person to like a well of water, most men have now been giving so much from their well that there is just this 2-3 inches at the bottom of the well for them to give from. And it's murky, muddy, just really kind of disgusting water, but it's all that they have. And so they're aware of the fact that it's inadequate. Mm. Men know that. Men know that they're not giving enough. They know they're not giving the way that they used to. They know they're not showing up in the same ways. They're giving literally all that they have, though. And so if a woman comes in and says, you're not giving me enough, you used to do this and you used to do this, these are beautiful reminders of my absolute failure. And I know that.
I laugh because I recognize I have been there.
Absolutely.
You're like, fuck, like, hold on. You're telling me all the things I'm not doing. Now you're showing me how I'm literally not enough. And you're also explaining to me even deeper of like, and you can't even give me what I need now. You're like, you used to give me steak dinner, but now you don't even do that. Then you don't give me this, and then that's not enough. You're like, I'm pulling from everywhere I can, And so I see this happen to men a lot, and I can relate personally for sure. So,
So going back to the discussion, like, what do we talk about here? It's me asking, hey, how are you doing? To the man.
Right.
How are you? How's good? And inevitably, I'm sure you're going to get this idea of like, I'm doing all right. I'm fine. Just tired. That is the most bullshit excuse that men give, and we all give it.
Of course.
I'm just tired. because that's easier than say, I'm drowning. That's easier than saying,
I need a fucking lifeboat.
yeah, exactly. I am terrified and I can't let you know, because if you know that, then you're going to think that I'm weak and you're going to feel even less safe.
Yep.
And then I'm going to be managing your feelings about my feelings as well as my feelings. So it's easier just to not say anything at all.
Yep.
So if a woman can show up in that space of, how are you doing? Like, no, really, like, how are you doing? Can we talk about that? And not that I'm going to take all your problems away from you. It's not, I'm going to, I'll go get the job and you just do this, or, in a more traditional,
That's
role.
so disempowering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how are you doing? What do you need? What would be good for you to start feeling that well?
Right.
Do you need, support? Do you need some sort of love? Do you need a hobby? Do you need a break? And, can I help facilitate that? I know of these groups of men that are joining together that are really helping each other out in those ways as well. I would love to support you in going to that.
Do you think by them going to that, that's going to give their partner the connection and the desires and the things they need by doing that? Like, and it's because I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So I'm only asking out of curiosity, because in my thought is if a woman at that moment in time is talking to her, her husband or boyfriend, lover, whatever that is, right? Whatever that relationship is, and they're seeking deeper connection or they're seeking deeper understanding, would they not bring it to the attention of saying, hey, listen, like right now, like I am feeling like I'm feeling disconnected from you, or bringing awareness to that, so they're not sweeping their feelings underneath the mat, right?
Of
and
course.
hoping that some men's group's going to solve that, right? So how do you think that conversation happens so it's not disempowering the woman in this particular case, or it's not disempowering the man as well?
Right.
And I'm taking those just as two human beings having a relationship, right? There's always a feminine role and a masculine role, whether it's, men and men or whatever. But
yeah. We talked about perspective.
Right.
And this idea of, I need to own my own choices. I need to own my own experiences. I need to own my own feelings. And I believe for the feminine, that can be the same. So do you need to disempower yourself? Do you need to ignore your own emotions? No. Can you also own how maybe you've created some of your scenario, your own circumstances? Are you showing up in gratitude? When's the last time this person that you're saying, I'm feeling disconnected from you, when's the last time you said, hey, thank you so much for everything that you do for me. Thank you for the way that you care for me. Thank you for sacrificing yourself the way that you have for me. Thank you for all the ways that you've shown up to love me and all the things that you supported me through when I'm not doing well. That goes a long way.
Yeah.
Now, does that require you to say, I feel plenty connected and I'm going to disengage from my own emotions? No. But what is your role in that? How are you providing support? How are you providing nurturing, which is very much more the feminine energy is nurturing. And what that does for so many men is like, man, they want to do more.
They want to show up big.
Yeah. I received gratitude for this. I received recognition for this. I want to do more of that. That filled my well. That helped me. And it's this idea of reciprocity. So interesting in masculine, feminine dynamics and men and women. I believe we've gone down kind of a incorrect path that because we want equality, that means that we need to be doing the same things. And what I do for you and the way that I provide for you is the same way that you provide for me. And we know that it's not going to be the same.
Yeah, that's not what I'm looking for
either. It doesn't need to be the same to be equal.
Right.
And we also know that human beings experience love in both the way that we show it and in the way that we receive it in different ways. Right. The love languages that are so popular and so many people talk about. My love language might be those words of affirmation. You're recognizing me. I'm receiving gratitude for this. I don't need a gift.
Right.
I don't need a little, token. Some people that might be a great thing. But am I looking to receive gifts or am I looking to give gifts? And if we can both recognize that what I've created and what my life is mine, and that in that accountability that I can start speaking to what I want to experience. And a woman can say, I'm going to show up for you, I'm going to provide, and I'm going to fill your well, and here's the reciprocity that I want in that. But going back to that thing with the nice guy, for men and women, again, it is this idea of a hidden agenda. I'm going to give you this with the expectation, unspoken, that you're going to give me this in return. And men and women both do this.
Of course we do.
And then we get really pissed off when we don't get that thing in return. I had a job years ago where they hired me and they said, I'm going to pay you $50,000 for this year for this job. Long time ago. And I thought, great. I'm going to give you $100,000 worth of work. And at the end of this year, you're going to be so thrilled, you're going to want to pay me $100,000. I never said that to them.
Right.
And so for a year, I just killed myself to give that $100,000 worth. And at the end of the year, they said, Joe, you have been the most amazing employee. We're going to give you the biggest raise we've ever given anybody in our company. We're going to give you a 10% raise. We're going to give you $55,000. And I was livid. I was so insulted because I had an expectation of them that they weren't aware of, that they maybe could have met had they known about it, but it was never discussed. So in a relationship with you, when we're going back to this conversation of like, how can I support you without, betraying myself? How clear are our expectations of this relationship? And if we didn't set that up when we entered the relationship, how clear are we being in it now? And are we both receiving?
Is there any place where that you can recommend books or places where people can go get that information? Because I think you're correct by saying that. Actually, I know you are. And that is, we have to know our expectations and our intentions of where we're going, because if not, we're just kind of like blindly going there. And I was talking to you earlier about how a lot of men, including myself, like in full transparency and accountability, I got to a point in time where I was like, listen, I am simply just going to stand in a place and time of surrender, and surrender means to me no attachment, and no attachment means to me. And this is what I had convinced myself of. And I thought I was doing it, for me personally, I thought I was doing it in the higher level of consciousness. I thought I was doing it in the higher awareness. I think it's a Bhagavad-gita. I can't say it correctly. But basically this, a book from India, right? That's like teaches about suffering and pain and all these things and the attachment. And Buddha, I think, talks about this too, or Buddhism, that when we stand at a place of non-attachment, then we stand at a place of non-suffering. And I think men have I love you men out there, but I think we've come up with this concept, and women too, and I think it's bullshit, that we're not attached to anything. We're not going to be attached to anybody. We're going to live for the moment. And I have said these words out of my own mouth, so I'm calling myself out on this publicly. And that is that I'm going to live for the moment. I'm going to do these things. I'm not going to be attached to anybody else. I'm just going to be free. And what that meant really was, I'm not going to give enough of my life force so you can take it away or hurt me.
Right.
That's really what it meant. Now, I didn't see it at the moment. Really thought I was doing the right thing. But I found out that even if that is the case, that is not the case here on earth. That might be a case in another realm that I do not have experience in. And I do believe there's something beyond the consciousness of those things. But we've definitely created that.
Yeah. As I talk to men and work with them, I talk a lot about going along this journey. And if I'm at point X and I want to get to point Y, to your argument, it's, well, just don't have a point Y. Don't have anywhere you're going. Don't have anything that you want to do. Don't have anything specific that you want to experience. And if you don't have that point Y, well, then you can't fail. You can't be let down in the pursuit of that thing. And at the end of your life, yes, you can say, hey, I had no attachments and I avoided a lot of suffering and I did very little. I existed for a solid 80 years. Great.
Sounds misery,
right,
Joe,
yeah.
misery.
But I did never get let down because I did never miss my target. What I believe really creates the most fulfilling life is absolutely, I have X and I have Y, and when I hit Y, I'm going to have Z, and when I have Z, I'm going to keep going and keep going and keep going. Where I've removed the attachment is from my idea of how I'm going to get from point X to point Y.
Agreed.
And then I learned to love the journey as much as that destination point. And that journey becomes explorative in and of itself. And so if that's a relationship of, hey, here's where we are and here's where we want to get as a relationship, if I have in my mind of exactly how you need to show up to do that, yeah, I'm setting myself up for a lot of suffering. But if we're both clear about where we're going and we're both open to the idea of discovering how we do that along the way, that can be a very exciting thing.
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of relationships are like, my intention is to go from here to marriage. But it's like, okay, that's a thing. That's like saying that I want $1 million. That's a thing. But like, what's the experience in between? What do you really want to experience? Because if the idea is marriage, I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Right.
But if it's like, how do we explore? Where do we go in between there? So if somebody wants to maybe dive a little bit deeper into the subject, because we don't have enough time to do that,
Right.
but they want to dive deeper in that subject, can you recommend any books? Can you recommend anything you've read that was inspiring to you that you thought, okay, this is kind of the formulation on how to create a quality relationship based upon a place where I'm not disempowering myself, my partner's not disempowering themselves, and and I'm also not taking accountability for someone's emotions, and we get to co-create what we're creating together, because there is both energies, and I think we need, well, I know we need both of them to be able to walk a path that really in the end, I feel like we're just walking each other home anyways.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful quote. Two books that have really helped me. One, The Way of the Superior Man.
Great book.
Right. That one has really been beneficial to me. And then there's a book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Okay.
Which specifically for men, but for women as well in their masculine energy, has been very helpful to me as I move through my life in a more exciting and aligned way. Another one that comes to mind is called The Gap and the Gain.
Oh, by Dan Sullivan, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dan Sullivan, yeah.
Pretty Sullivan, yeah.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing with The Gap and the Gain is I go back to that journey of X to Y to Z, is the ability to every once in a while turn around and see how far we've come.
Mm-hmm.
And let's celebrate that. And let's find some presence and peace and fulfillment and pleasure in the moment and not just in the pursuit.
I love that. I relate so much to your story, your journey. First, I want to say thank you. I believe that it's important to recognize people for their, as you say, the gap and the gain, right? To see how far they have come. I know at one point in time you go from suicidal to doing your own work to diving in deep and not fucking giving up, not putting that bullet in your head or whatever it could have been that story and been the guy that's in the, that's in the papers like, oh, he took his own life. And once again, more men taking their own life. You chose differently. And then you chose to go through an empowerment stage. And then now you've created a entire program, and that entire program leads into coaching and really just walking men through. And so you understand I would say the journey, and you understand the experience of what men go through. And so I appreciate that about you. I appreciate that you hear the calling of men and you're like, listen, like, I'm not waiting for someone to answer that call. I'm going to be the one that answers that call. So I really appreciate that. Will you tell people where they can find you? Will you tell them where they can find your courses so that we can make sure that more men are feeling empowered? Because especially, your program is literally $40-$50 a month for something that can give somebody literally the lifeline that they have been seeking for, and they can do it in quietness because you have another program where they don't even have to even engage until they're ready to engage. You literally give everybody a place to meet you where they're at in their life.
Right. And that was important, to have the ability to meet men or women where they're at. I have a course for women on how to better understand and communicate with men.
Oh, beautiful. I didn't know that.
And on top of that, yes, I've created several offerings for men. And the place to go is algiesguard.com. And I'm sure you can, put that in some show notes or something.
Absolutely.
Or joesperedon.com.
Excellent.
And from either one of those, you can get to those places.
Yeah, and you can go to Spiritual Capitalism as well. And Spiritual Capitalist, excuse me. I always say Spiritual Capitalism because it's like this new thought process,
Absolutely.
right? But spiritualcapitalist.com, and find the information there as well. So 2 questions before we go. What does spiritual capitalism mean to you?
Spiritual capitalism to me means profit over purpose, or purpose over profit.
Right.
Right. As we've experienced capitalism for so long as profit over purpose, it's not served us very well.
It's not going to.
Yeah. But as we shift that to purpose over profit, profit becomes a byproduct of the way that we're showing up in the world. And it is inevitable. You will experience that when you're aligned with purpose. And that's been my experience in any kind of capitalist pursuit. that when I lead from purpose, the profit comes.
Always, always. Yes. You nailed it. And that's why I look at you and I'm like, oh yeah, you are definitely a spiritual capitalist. Like, yes, of course you want to have abundance because it is your birthright. Of course you want to live that life. You want to be able to take care of your kids. You want to be able to make sure that you provide. And I believe that's part of our job as men. And maybe that's just my fixed belief, but I do believe that. And that you want to provide and you want to do those things, but you don't want to do it over the suffering of another individual.
Right.
Because if you're giving enough value, it's easy for people to part with their money because it is an exchange of energy, really. And then the next thing I would have, with all the work you're doing with this, you go this point in time to where you were going to be remembered for, basically in the obituaries as a man that suffered, killed himself, and that's the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
The story's changed. So what do you want to be remembered for now?
Aside from the way that I show up for my own family, that I show up for my personal community, is being able to shift the narrative around masculinity. There are so many ideas of what masculinity is, and we tend to talk about muscles and deep voices and beards and things like this that aren't bad. But masculinity itself is something that is so much more powerful than that. And the way that we've culturally created a masculine ideal is not serving men or women. So if we're able to shift this idea around masculinity, I believe it invites our next evolution in our emotional capacity and in our ability to relate to each other. And that will create interdependence over the codependence that we've been experiencing for so many years.
I was just going to say, you know what? Thanks for having you on the show, but I'm going to let you expand on one thing, or ask that you would expand on one thing, and that is, what is masculinity, man?
Masculinity is the ability to create a container where safety and significance can be experienced.
Oof.
And safety and significance, I believe, are absolutely part of our birthright. The world that we have right now, we trade safety and significance for comfort and validation. And when we create healthy masculinity, we don't desire that same level of superficial validation or fleeting comfort. We step into something that is so much greater in an inherent safety and in an eternal significance. And that is why masculinity is so important to me, for ourselves and for, again, the evolution of society.
Man, I am so glad I asked you to. I'm so glad I just a little bit more. We need a little bit more out of you, Joe. Joe, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you sharing your soul. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with people so they can hear you. I appreciate your bravery in saying things that, some people might hear and be like, ooh, that's uncomfortable, or, oh, that's a little bit triggering. And I would ask people, if it's triggering, why is it triggering? And if it's triggering, what is inside of you that is unhealed that you can't hear these words? Because these are words of true empowerment to really help lift and help humanity. So again, thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, brother.